Are you actually making decisions? A common question I get is about decision making. It comes in different forms, but often people will ask, do you get to a place with awakening and realization or non-duality where you're no longer making choices? And it's always a bit of a challenging question to answer because partially I have to feel into where somebody's asking it from, why they're even asking the question in the first place. But the other reason it's challenging to answer is because the question itself has a really fundamental assumption built into it. What's interesting to me in this question is not so much whether or not there are choices, but it's the sense of the one who's making choices. Even the sense of the one who wants to know the answer to the question. That's where I'm interested in looking. That's where I typically try to point somebody. So in the moment you are curious about or thinking about whether or not decisions are actually made or you're making them, or whether you are going to get to a place where no decisions are being made or the sense of choice is no longer there, it's the you that's contemplating that feels like it needs to know that feels like it's going to get value out of understanding that. That's where the money is. And it's also the assumption that's constantly being made. The ego, to use a term for something that's not anything solid, but more of a collection of processes, is really ingenious this way. It never really tells you there's a self or a choice maker. It just assumes it all the time. It assumes it into apparent being. So choice is a perfect example of this. We wonder whether we can imagine how it would be to not have choices, but we can't begin to imagine what it would be like for the one who's even wondering that, who has any concern about choice, isn't there at all. We can't imagine that. What would that be like? Well, in one sense, it wouldn't be like anything in the way we're thinking. So the money is in the subjective pull in this experience. All of that endless parade of thoughts and concepts and beliefs and philosophies, whether we agree or disagree with this doctrine or that doctrine, what we think about non-duality or don't believe or do believe about non-duality and awakening and realization, all of that is just sort of a stream of distractions. They're always pointing the arrow of attention away from something. When we find a way to turn that back around and get to the source of attention, everything just stops. It's very, very clear. There's no need to even contemplate these things. But short of being able to drop right into that and really knowing what stopping is, I can make a few points about this curiosity about choice or choice making. See, it's really funny what the ego does. When these questions come up, it's often in a hypothetical or philosophical way. What's interesting is the mind likes to imagine how things are or are not when it concerns choice, not in the moment the choices are being made. It's always a little out of time, a little out of sync, and thus it can endlessly chew on this. But if you really focus attention down into the flow of experience, where the choices are actually being made, you'll never find the choice making as performed by the choice maker, not in direct experience. And yet, the thoughts can endlessly stream on in hypothetical ways about choices being made or not being made. This is all just mental noise. It's the fear of unknowing, of the unknown, that's here right now, parading itself as the desire to know and understand. So underneath that question about choice, often there's a distortion. The distortion says, I really want to know this. I'm really curious about this. But in truth, that's only one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is a fear of seeing that right here, right now, even the one who's curious about this cannot be found. Because that renders all of the ego structures inert immediately. Nothing to seek anymore. Nothing to solve anymore. Nothing to figure out anymore. There's no concern about choice. There's no concern about how this is moving, whether it's spontaneous or whether there's hesitation or struggle. There's no concern about suffering or ending suffering. all concerns drop away when the concerned one is no more. So it doesn't mean that the question, is there a choice, is not a useful question. But I would direct somebody to get to the root of what it is or who it is that actually wants to know that. Look deeply into that. Don't get up in the mind imagining, philosophizing, referencing doctrine. Go backwards. Get to the root of where that curiosity is even arising from in the first place. Why would you want to know that? Because it feels comfortable to know whether there is choice or is not choice. Either of those views, which are both ultimately a distortion when it comes to realization itself, are somewhat comfortable. What's uncomfortable is seeing that there's nowhere that question can even arise. That the question itself is meaningless. That's what we don't want to see. So dive right into that big question mark and just stay there.